Hey, I've been writing this thing and it's been getting a lot of control, so I think I'm going to read it out to you. The Last Assignment of Gary 7 by Adam Kidd, based on Star Trek by Gene Roddenberry. And this is Headcanon. Prologue. New York State, Eastern Coalition of the United States of America, Earth, June 11th, 2039. Gary Seven's workshop lay hidden within a sprawling junkyard, a graveyard for machines and ideas long abandoned. Twisted missile casings, shattered drones, and decaying aircraft shells littered the landscape like relics of a forgotten war. The desert wind stirred faint clouds of dust, whispering through the rustling remains of technology that had once held the promise of domination. In the middle of all of it stood a weathered barn, patched together from steel plating, broken solar panels, and remnants of old satellites, a sanctuary assembled from the bones of a lost world. Inside, alien circuits hummed, merging with human-made scrap in strange harmony. Gary Seven sat at his workbench, his servo resting on the cluttered surface like an old companion. The small black device was deceptively simple, worn from years of use. Its surface scuffed and scratched, but no less powerful. The servo could alter reality, open portals across space and time, strip a person's mind bare, or paralyze them with touch. For Gary, it was a tool of survival and creativity. But tonight, it felt more like a reminder of everything he had lost. Gary Seven didn't belong to this era. In fact, he didn't belong to any time at all. Plucked from Earth thousands of years ago and returned during the height of its Cold War, he had been trained by the enigmatic Aegis, a covert interstellar organization that guided civilization from the shadows. For decades, Gary operated as an agent on Earth, fixing moments, nudging history, preventing catastrophes before they happened. But that was a long time ago. Now the Aegis were corrupted by unknown future forces and they wanted him gone. He was a rogue element, an outdated tool the universe had outgrown. They saw him as a liability, too stubborn, too independent, too immortal. So on occasion, they sent their pawns, Romulans, Klingons, Orions, even Borg drones, to test his immortality. But Gary had made up a habit of surviving things that were supposed to kill him. Not that anyone on Earth would ever help him either. Not that anyone on Earth was able to help him either. 15 years ago, he had been apprehended by future humans in fancy military uniforms who promised that in exchange for his obedience and non-interference in the political affairs of the human and augmented human races, that the people around him would receive full protection. His partner Isis, a beautiful shapeshifter, would be extracted immediately, and friends and family he cultivated since his 1968 arrival on Earth would be guaranteed full protection. Up until now, this deal had been unbroken, but the recent death of 92-year-old Roberta Lincoln, his longtime connection to this planet, had given him second thoughts about the deal. How long could some mystery organization keep a deal as long as he sits by and watches everyone die from a distance, unable to understand how every life lost, every species wiped out by war chipped away at his human psyche? Even if he was nearly immortal, his heart and mind still took the damage of mortal emotions. Above the workbench, an old Philips TV buzzed with static, the screen flickering with distorted broadcasts. A tangle of adapters and makeshift electronics fed the TV signals it had no right to receive, transmissions from places Gary shouldn't be able to see. A commercial sputtered into view, the signal crackling. The finest avocados in the world, Saudi avocados. Taste the future. The ad faded, replaced by a slick graphics of the Eastern Coalition's news channel. On screen, talking heads droned on about Alexander Khan and his controversial decision to seek sanctuary in Nevada, denouncing him for abandoning his augmented followers. "The people of Helios have been betrayed," one commenter declared. "Khan fled on Air Force One with the promise of surrendering the colonies to the Eastern Coalition, yet here he is hiding in the protection of Nevada's army." Gary sighed. His eyes flickered with weariness as the broadcast shifted. The screen cut to the Nevada National Television. Grainy footage showed Khan standing before the Augment Friendship Embassy in Apex, Nevada, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Even with the screen's distortion, Khan's presence was undeniable. Calm, calculated, the weight of choices written into every line of his face. Gary leaned closer, fingers drumming slightly against the servo. He knew that face too well. Decades ago, Gary had tried to shape Khan into a leader, a savior who wouldn't become another tyrant like Izam Khan, his brother, or the infamous Khan Noonien Singh before him. But even the best intentions hadn't been enough. For a moment, Gary wondered if he'd failed Khan as much as the Aegis had failed him. Leaders always fell in the end, and it was the survivors who had to pick up the pieces. Now, Alexander Khan stood on the brink of the sacrifice, ready to trade his freedom for the safety of the augmented colony at Helios. The newscaster's voice rang out. "Khan is expected to surrender to the Eastern Coalition soon. His followers await their fate." The screen stuttered momentarily, splitting into two overlapping broadcasts, one announcing Khan's surrender, the other one declaring defiance. A flicker of confusion crossed Gary's face. For a second, the TV seemed caught between two possibilities, as if the timeline itself couldn't decide which event to broadcast. With a harsh crack, the glitch resolved, but a faint buzz lingered in the air, like a ticking clock out of sync with time itself. Gary squinted at the distorted image, unsettled. It wasn't the first time the feeds had misaligned, just this first time it felt deliberate. The barn hummed with quiet energy, the ambient sound of hidden mechanisms at rest. Cats prowled along the edges of the room, curling up beside the heat vents, their sleek bodies reflecting the barn's strange warmth. Beneath the floor, an AI network sprawled like tangled roots, cooled by a concealed swimming pool. It managed the systems Gary relied on, but it was just another piece of maintenance to him, another part of this endless routine that kept his life from slipping into chaos. Entirely into chaos. At the far end of the barn, nestled between stacks of half-dismantled engines and old server racks, stood an ancient reinforced safe, a relic from a time when vaults were built to withstand wars. But this safe was more than just a vault for valuables. Its surface was scorched and dented, as if it had resisted forces not entirely of this world. The walls around it had been retrofitted with laser grids, motion sensors, and a tangle of defense mechanisms. Gary's first and last line of security. Chains crisscrossed the door, held in place by automated locks, giving the entire setup a strange mix of old-world ruggedness and alien precision. Whatever was inside, it didn't need to be contained. It needed to be kept hidden, and Gary's servo was the only thing that could fully control it. Gary adjusted a circuit board beneath his fingers. The metal cooled to the touch. 14 years of exile had blurred time for him. Every day felt like a small battle fought against entropy, a series of repairs and half-finished projects, each one meant to stave off the inevitable collapse. "Stone knives and bearskin," he muttered, fitting a piece into place. His dry humor was such a defense mechanism as turrets. I'm going to try that one again. "Stone knives and bearskin," he muttered, fitting a piece into place. His dry humor was as much a defense mechanism as the turrets hidden within the barn walls. Jokes kept the isolation at bay, but only just. Gary's hand paused over the circuit board, his eyes narrowing at the image on the screen sharpened. The camera feed was shaky, capturing scenes of chaos and fire. Red Brigade soldiers in scavenged armor pouring through the once impregnable walls of the Helios colony, reducing it to rubble. In the midst of the destruction, two young figures ran through the smoke. The girl's small frame darted through the broken pillars, her curly hair bouncing with each step. The boy, older and stronger, kept close to her side, dragging her along whenever she stumbled. Their faces were etched with fear, but their eyes carried a glimmer of hope. They just needed to reach the monorail. The camera panned widely on the monorail station as the monorail station came to view, a skeletal structure teetering on the edge of collapse. Two teenage children sprinted towards it, their feet kicking up ash and debris. Red Brigade soldiers pursued them, rifles raised, barking orders that echoed a din of the battle. On screen, the girl tripped. The boy hauled back at her to... One more try. On screen, the girl tripped. The boy hauled her back to her feet, shouting something Gary couldn't make out. Together, they threw themselves towards the monorail's doors just as they hissed open. A last-minute shot rang out, shattering glass inches from the girl's head, but they made it. The doors sealed shut. The monorail groaned and lurched forward along the track, racing away from the ruined colony. Gary's hand tightened around the servo as he watched. The screen flickered, showing glimpses of soldiers torching Helios, executing civilians and marking walls with the Red Brigade's sigil, an unmistakable symbol of conquest. The safe door at the back of the barn groaned ominously, chains rattling as the laser grid flickered in and out of focus. Purple-black smoke hissed from the edges, curling through the room like tendrils of malevolent intent. Gary muttered a curse under his breath, aiming the servo at the control panel. The laser snapped into place, locking the smoke behind the doors, for now. As the security feed at Helios faded in and out, an old episode of Cosmos kicked in. Carl Sagan's voice drifted from TV. Aggression, submission, hostility towards outsiders, these are the legacies we must overcome. Gary chuckled without humor, his expression bitter. Sure, Carl, but what if they don't want to learn? The servo chipped, its pulse shifting suddenly. The safe shuddered violently. Chains snapped, and the laser grid collapsed in a shower of sparks. The portal within the safe burst open, flooding the barn with a storm of energy and swirling smoke. As a portal tore open, a low rumble echoed through the barn, not just from the portal, but somewhere deeper, as if the very fabric of time itself trembled. Shelves rattled, tools clattered to the ground, and for the briefest of moments, the world around Gary fractured. Objects in the barn flickering between past and present, their positions shifting as though caught between parallel versions of themselves. It only lasted a second, but it left the distinct impression that something much bigger had just arrived, something Gary wasn't ready to face. Gary's hand shot to the servo, but his turrets stayed silent. His connection was denied. Servo beyond service life. Damn. Gary's servo pulsed faintly as it was tossed into the charger, but Gary's servo pulsed faintly as it was tossed into a charger, but skipped, its familiar hum replaced with jagged vibrations. A brief surge of power flickered along the circuits, as if the tiny device struggled to align with the flow of time. For a split second, Gary's vision swam, overlapping images of the barn in different states. Empty, burning, untouched. He shook his head to clear the sensation, but the jarring dissonance lingered in the back of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Apologies, I'm having a stuttering fit. Moving on. I'm okay. A wave of pawns poured through the portal. Klingons, Romulans, Orions, and Tholian drones moved with precision, flanked by hulking Gorn soldiers. Their weapons gleamed under the dim light, and their eyes burned with cold purpose. At the center, a Romulan commander sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. 7! Gary cracked his neck, more annoyed than impressed. He dropped the servo into its charger again, his movements unhurried. Let's get this over with, he muttered, rolling his shoulders. A Klingon charged, his bat'leth slicing through the air in a brutal arc. Gary ducked low, driving a wrench through the warrior's throat with a wet crunch. A Romulan raised a disruptor, but Gary twisted it from his hand and fired it back without hesitation, dropping him instantly. The battle unfolded like a familiar dance. Chains snapped through the air, wrapping around a Gorn's legs. Gary yanked hard, sending the massive creature back into a stack of metal crates. An Orion pirate jumped from the rafters, but Gary's crowbar met him mid-air, knocking him unconscious in a single fluid motion. Gary dodged towards the servo, hoping when he pushed the button enough juice would be in to get the offensive online. As he pushed the button, the turrets roared to life. The plasma fire began ripping through the invading forces. Energy nets descended from the ceiling, ensnaring drones in glowing strands, but one Tholian drone scuttled across the room, shorting out the electric webs. Gary swore under his breath. Always the damn turrets. A Gorn smashed through the netting, charging forward. Gary snatched an oxygen tank from under the workbench, hurled it towards the beast, and fired a phaser shot. The explosion shook the barn, scattering invaders like broken toys. Panting, Gary reached the containment switch and slammed down. A shimmering field snapped into place, trapping the surviving invaders. A Romulan commander glared from behind the barrier, his sneer intact. The Aegis will come for you again, 7. Gary leaned heavily on the workbench, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. Tell them I'll be here waiting. With a flick of the servo, the portal sealed, the chain snapping back at the laser as the lasers reactivated. He slumped against the wall, wiping blood from his brow. His gaze drifted toward the TV screen. There, the two children on the TV had escaped aboard the monorail, leaving the burning ruins of the Helios colony behind them. Red Brigade soldiers chased the train, but it surged forward, disappearing into the distance. Gary watched in silence, a flicker of something like hope stirring in his chest. Good kid, he whispered. Keep running. The barn fell silent, the air heavy with the smell of burnt circuits and blood. Gary stared at the half-assembled machine on the workbench, a gate to nowhere, waiting to be finished. The servo hummed beside him, its pulse steady and constant, a reminder that time marched on, indifferent to his battles. And so did he. That's my prologue. That took me 18 minutes to read. That's a whole short story. And I'm doing a whole book of these, and I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.